It's my pleasure and privilege to have been invited to moderate this Ethical Finance ASEAN 2025 Fireside Chat focusing on Islamic finance and sustainability. The Islamic financial industry is displaying an ever-increasing focus and commitment to the various facets of sustainable finance. Environmental, social and governance factors, whether you look at them as one or whether you look at them individually, have been of elevating importance within the various banking and finance communities, with each one looking at ways to embed them across transactions and portfolios and into operating infrastructures, whilst regulators and central banks have been working to codify ESG requirements to promote transparency and to push towards standardization. With recognition and awareness of global strategic direction, the Islamic financial industry has sought to align its sustainability approaches with international standard setting within its policy formation, as well as its financial practices, and has extended its connectivity to the Global Financial Sustainability Summit COP, with COP27 and COP28 having been hosted in Egypt and the UAE respectively, whilst COP29 was hosted in Azerbaijan in November last year. At COP28 in the United Arab Emirates in 2023, the exploration of the Islamic and sustainable finance nexus moved from sideline, where it was introduced at COP27 in Scotland, to main event for the first time. Having demonstrated through the discussions and debates of COP28 that progress was insufficiently slow across all areas of climate action in the preceding 24 months, countries responded collectively with a decision on how to accelerate climate action by 2030, based upon a review of every element under negotiation, with the objective of enabling countries to develop stronger climate action plans. Muslim majority country governments were more proactive in their participation than ever before, with an acceptance of the necessity of transition beginning to feature strongly in policy formation and the development of supporting law and regulation. So last year, according to the London Stock Exchange Group's data, green and sustainability Sukuk reached over $15 billion, a total of 6.2% of total Sukuk issuance, which represented 1.8% of total ESG bonds issued in 2024, and marked another record year for our sector, reflecting a 14% year-on-year growth. And it was interesting to note that green Sukuk value, as a share overall of ESG Sukuk issuance, actually reduced from 58% of the total, where it stood in 2023, to 31% in 2024, as sustainability Sukuk re-established momentum. Looking across asset classes, by the end of 2024, the total value of ESG-aligned Sharia funds was pushing towards $10 billion, an increase of 21% on the previous year. Although modest, the growth outpaced that of the mainstream Islamic fund universe, which itself increased by 17%. And amongst the OIC countries, Malaysia and Saudi Arabia led in terms of assets under management within ESG Sharia funds. But products are now also domiciled outside of OIC, and that includes in the UK, USA, Ireland, Luxembourg, and Hong Kong. Amongst ESG screened Sharia compliant equities, nearly half are listed in non-OIC countries, including the UK, the US, and India, with US listed equities accounting for over 25% of that total. Malaysian ESG Sharia screened stocks lead in Muslim majority markets, representing 6.8% of the total. So just following that little bit of context for the conversation that I'm about to have, it's indeed an honour and a privilege to introduce Charles Haresnate to this fireside discussion on Islamic finance and sustainability. Charles is the Chief Executive Officer at Gatehouse Bank, which he joined in 2017. Prior to joining Gatehouse, Charles was Group Managing Director at Aldermore Bank from 2011. And before he joined Aldermore, he worked at Connells, one of the UK's largest estate agency groups. And there he was Group Mortgage Services Director. Charles has worked for a number of other household names in the UK banking and building society sectors, including Nationwide and HBOS, where he was a senior executive responsible for mortgage sales and portfolio acquisitions. He's been Deputy Chairman of the Council of Mortgage Lenders and Chairman of the Intermediary Mortgage Lenders Association. Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
In terms of innovating products relevant to the Sharia sustainability nexus that I alluded to in my opening remarks, I think it's fair to say that Gatehouse Bank is considered to be somewhat of a pioneer in the space. What have been your observations about the opportunities to innovate Sharia compliant, green and sustainable products for your customers in the UK? And can you tell us a little bit about the bank's experiences, your experience indeed, as you've moved along and done this?
Yeah, thanks, Stella, and welcome, and great to see everybody online. So I hope you'll find this useful. I hadn't realised actually, Stella, that I'd done all those things. I must be a lot older. I kind of keep thinking I actually am really. But anyway, the last journey, which has been 8 years at Gatehouse Bank, has been fascinating. So it's the first time I've worked in a fully Sharia compliant bank, which is what we are. We're a full UK bank deposit taker. And actually, we've spent a lot of time trying to really foster our green products. And it chimes really well with the Sharia context of what we do, to be an ethically based finance provider, both on home finance, which is what we do, so the equivalent of mortgages, and also on savings, because we are fully self-funding in terms of liquidity. We found it really interesting on the savings side. So in terms of products, we did quite a bit of research before we launched what we call our woodland saver accounts, which is what it says. We plant trees in the event that customers open or renew accounts with us. The research we've done shows, particularly in the younger age group, so the 18 to 24 age group, 2/3 of those respondents found that the green finance, the greenness of it, was a fundamental driver to their decision-making process. So it wasn't just about rate, although rate has to be there or thereabouts, profit rate, but it's about what are the savings doing? How is the bank using them? Which is obviously very important from a Sharia context. So obviously with our kind of ethical and Sharia context, we don't deploy any of our deposits in what might be considered inappropriate activities. Funding gun running, funding betting shops, all those things we don't do, which you would expect we wouldn't do. But it's really interesting that the younger generation are becoming much, much more aware and questioning us quite hard about the kind of green status of what we do. So we've been, for example, as a bank, we've been carbon neutral for 3 years. That's fundamentally important. I know a lot of other people are on the same journey or have been on it for some time. We've got a track to net zero. That will take quite a long time. But really, our kind of woodland saver and the whole, planting trees and carbon neutral has been fundamental in our product design in recent times. So we're a relatively small bank in the UK with the third largest Sharia compliant bank in Europe. That's quite a good stat, and we're growing. But there's a lot more we can do. So far we planted 50,000 trees, so it's almost a forest. But people see that as fundamentally important, and we'll continue to do that. Just a last stat on this: the research that we've done as well, which is quite a considerable number of people we surveyed, 63% of the respondents were very familiar with green-related products in the UK generally. So they researched them, they understand them, and that is the way forward, not just any old product.
I find those observations actually fascinating. I mean, there are many members of the audience who will be familiar with the UK Islamic banking community and others that won't. But for quite a long time, we've been analysing the client base in the UK and the appetite for Sharia compliant banking and finance products. And there is proven evidence that the Islamic bank savings products have been very attractive, but historically, I think a lot of the commentary has been that savers have been attracted, be they Muslim or not, by the performance as well. Because when I look at the rankings and I look at the media and it promotes, instant access online savings products, Islamic banks, including Gatehouse, have ranked very favourably. But the comment has always been about the returns. So I'm really interested in hearing what you say about the green credentials of the product actually ranking equally, if not higher, for part of your base. But it still suggests that actually the interest of Islamic finance is spreading beyond Muslim clients who are a priority here. Financial inclusion is a priority here in the UK for government and for private sector as well. But it's interesting that it's still encompassing, both communities.
Yeah, and on our home finance side, so our Sharia mortgages, that's a harder one to get the green credentials across, because it's a bigger challenge. So we might come on to later, but we were founder members of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Banking. Even though we're relatively small in the scheme of US and other banks, we were founder members because we thought it was really important. But for us to be almost, carbon neutral, or in fact going to carbon zero, we as a bank and other banks in the audience will have to include what happens with their customers' footprints, as well as the bank's own footprint, which makes it an interesting, very interesting challenge. So, for example, we're financing homes for either for investment or for living in. What is the status of those homes? How can we help our customers become, more green in the home environment? The heating, the heat pumps, the double glazing, the solar panels. How can we help with that? Because actually that counts towards the bank's carbon footprint. So, if you're an even bigger bank, it is a very, very big challenge. And so that's all about developing more products. So, for example, we actually give a slightly preferential rate treatment to customers who have developed their homes into a more eco-rated house. So obviously in the UK, the houses are rated by an independent valuer according to their efficiency rating. And so if someone spent time and money making the home more efficient and therefore greener and more carbon friendly, we give some credit to that in terms of the rate that we charge, because we think it's the right thing to do. And we're shortly launching more products to help customers make their homes more energy efficient. So I think this whole journey is something that we and others are kind of on, but it's a very long journey, I've got to say.
It's interesting, and I guess as an external observer, it reinforces the way in which an Islamic bank in the UK is not just delivering innovative, cutting-edge products that are sustainable and Sharia compliant to its client base, but it's weaving that offering into top-down policy formation and some of the commitments that are being made, of course, by government and encouraging private sector to come along in their response to that, and really sort of performing on an equivalent level to some of your conventional peers, if not above it, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mention that, Stella, because there is certainly in the UK there is a kind of politics involved as well that we're having to navigate our way through. So, for example, through nobody's fault, but just a quirk of history, some of the tax rules in the UK and the land rules in the UK really don't help Sharia compliant financing. It's just a quirk of the past because it was so small in the UK historically. It's now growing at a much more acceptable rate, I think. So we've had to lobby very hard with the UK government and have recently been successful, which is good news, in terms of equalising the tax treatment for people who are buying homes in the UK. And this can apply to overseas customers also who want to buy homes in the UK for either investment or family purposes. And interestingly, 15% of our overseas customers come from Singapore, which is quite interesting, who are buying homes in the UK for either investment or for their own purposes. So, us persuading government to equalise it, because otherwise it's sort of unfair treatment compared to conventional finance. And we're bringing this, because it's now more prevalent, Islamic finance in the UK, it's becoming more of a bigger thing to focus on. And we gradually chipped off quite a few of these now. We've got one or two still to go, and we're lobbying hard with our new UK government, and we're ever optimistic we'll get one or two across the line. But the key ones have now been equalised, which is really important. So that proves, I think, the fact that Islamic finance in the UK has now got a much bigger priority than it ever had historically, which is a great thing. In the UK, for example, there are 4 million people who declare themselves as a Muslim, and that is the fastest growing segment of the UK society. And the population in the Muslim population has a lower average age than the general UK population. So they want more products, they want things that suit them. And it's up to us to make sure that, but while we're doing that, they have to have that green tinge around them because that's the right thing to do.
Mm. Thank you. There's so much here in your remarks that I want to sort of drill into and pick out. You mentioned principles for responsible banking, so I'm going to park that for a minute because I want to come back to it before we finish. But I think because of the focus and because this is an ASEAN event, you know, before we started our discussion here, we've learned from other sessions about some of the challenges that global financial institutions face when investing in ASEAN. Now, not many people know this, but it was my honour to serve as a non-executive director at Gatehouse for a couple of years through its formation phase. So I know that historically, Gatehouse has had a solid strategy for ASEAN and particularly for Malaysia, and has long-term experience of the region. So you've told us a lot about the UK. You mentioned, which interested me, your clients overseas and those in Southeast Asia. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about how the bank's been positioned to work with the market in ASEAN and to deliver its Sharia compliant sustainable products and services to its customers beyond the UK. What challenges particularly has Gatehouse faced in doing that?
I think one of the key challenges actually is people who want to invest in the UK generally need a UK bank account to get a home facility, you know, to get an Islamic mortgage. That's quite difficult to do unless you've already got a connection into the UK banking system. So that's something we're working on currently, because I think if we can find a way of creating some form of UK banking account, then that'll enable even more people to come and get facilities with us. So that's one thing we're working on. That's probably the biggest single obstacle, I think, for somebody coming to finance a UK property. The rest of it is just us extending our reach into the region. And so obviously we deal with brokers in the region who have clients who want to place business with us. We also have people can come directly to us. We have an internet and telephony based offering where we will give the full advice if required. So I think we have a broad offering. And just out of interest, you know, we come out regularly. So if anybody wants to see us, always welcome. I'm in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore next week. So we're making the effort to try and get out and explain our proposition to people in the ASEAN region. But yeah, it's just really a question of us working out. We've got, I think, a fairly slick entry point. So, you know, we have a web entry which you can go end to end through the process, which I think makes life a bit easier when you're doing things at a distance. But obviously, the key things are: have you got a UK bank account? Quite important. Secondly, can you speak English or some form of English or a bit of English? Because you have to be able to understand our terms and conditions. It's a regulatory requirement at our end, and obviously most people can, which is great news. So, you know, that's kind of what we're doing at the present time. Okay.
Thank you for that. And I hope you have a successful trip. And I'm sure that a lot of our audience will be looking forward to meeting you directly. Let's go back to Principles for Responsible Banking, which was created in 2019 through a partnership between founding banks and the United Nations. And it was created as a unique framework for ensuring that signatory banks' strategy and practices align with the vision that society set out for its future through the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think it's more than 4 years now since Gatehouse became the first fully Sharia compliant bank to sign up for the UN PRB. And, you know, as a British Islamic financial sector practitioner, as well as a personal endorser of sustainability, I'm very proud that Gatehouse did that. My own firm, DD Cap, is also an endorser of the principles, although we're not a bank, so we're not a signatory in the same way. And I think we're still the only intermediary service provider in the Islamic space that's signatory to Principles for Responsible Investment. So these things are really important, and I just can't emphasize how important I think it is for our banks and financial institutions to have their space in these sort of initiatives. But I'm interested to know how you found the journey since Gatehouse made the commitment. There are other, I think, banks who are represented in Islamic finance who have followed similarly, but I must say there hasn't been an overwhelming dash to do it, which I've noticed. So Have you got any guidance that you'd offer fellow bankers who are active within the Islamic financial sector and might be considering the same pathway?
Yeah, what I would say is, particularly if you're at the smaller end of the banking institutions, it is a big commitment. Excuse me. So it's important to take that on board before actually signing up for the initiative. Yeah, we've had to employ specific staff with expertise in, understanding our footprint, understanding our customers' footprint, doing the research. There is a lot of reporting required into the UN, which is good. A pile of hassle at the start, if I'm honest, because it was a big leap for us. But actually, to be fair, what it has done is given us a massive discipline on what we should be tracking and how we should be tracking things, the trends, etc. And also, we have to publish reports, make them publicly available on our progress, which gives us a good discipline and keeps us on account to make sure we're making progress and doing the right thing. So if people look at our website, you'll see on the website there are the full reports that we send to the UN that are published there. Our investors now ask us questions about our sustainability because they know we're part of this network. So actually it keeps us true and it makes us do the right thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. It gives you a discipline to do it. But it is quite a task to do. The other thing is, in terms of signing up for a kind of path to net zero, which is obviously going to take quite some time, we have to publish again what are our plans, how are we going to do it, how are we going to help customers become more sustainable in their own right, in their own lives. And actually that's quite difficult. We don't know what all our customers do every day, but what we do know is what house they live in if we're financing it, and how we might be able to help them make it more efficient and sustainable. So I think really it's not for the faint-hearted, but it's definitely worth it if you go into it, in my opinion. You do get a lot of feedback from the UN. You get some peer group reporting, which is quite helpful. The one thing we don't do, though, if I'm honest, as a group of members, so the UN do a lot of coordinating and a lot of reporting comes out of it. But I think going forward, we should probably be doing more as peer group members to coordinate with each other. So what we do is we report into the UN. There's not a huge amount, if I'm honest, or not enough collaboration across the membership of the UN PRBB. I think that's an opportunity for us to do more, particularly when you've got smaller institutions that need to learn off other people. What are you doing? It's not a state secret. It's actually something that we can all benefit from by working together. So I think for me, I'm looking to try and do a bit more of that going forward. So there are some very big institutions that are kind of quite far ahead in this region. ING is a good example. European bank. So we talk to them from time to time, and you think, crikey, I didn't realise you did that, and that's really interesting. And people are generally very forthcoming if we ask the questions. So I would suggest collaborating with somebody first who's already in the UN PRBB to understand the practical implications of it. But we found it very helpful, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd endorse that fully. I mean, the practical implications, DDCAP's been a PRI signatory, I think, since 2016, but we weren't in there at sort of ground level. So we had to adapt and learn. We did the same thing. We used it as a sort of learning process and worked out where the rest of the sector was moving towards, and then actually found out that there was quite a lot that we could contribute in our small way to responses and to enabling the PRI to compile its data. But actually, as you say, we were a little bit isolated because there weren't any more from our space. But in PRB, it's been interesting. I certainly see Gatehouse as a pathfinder, interesting too, that it's a smaller institution. But where there has been other commitment, it has been also apparent that ASEAN banks, particularly Malaysia's CIMB, is one that springs to mind, and its leadership have been also very committed to following that path.
Yeah. I think just at that point, Stella, you make a very good point there in terms of leadership. I mean, if you look at most things get done top down. So if the executive believe in it and deliver on it, then everyone else does. It's just a fact of life. So the passion of the senior executive in an organization is the only way this can actually work, and we can get better at it. So I won't be alone in this, but part of my annual objectives, as reviewed by the chairman of the board, includes this kind of stuff. It's not all about hitting the numbers and getting the profit out.
Yeah.
It's about how do we do it and what impact are we making on society. And that is something, if the chief executives and the executives and the board, for that matter, genuinely believe in it and genuinely practice it, it will happen. Without that, it won't happen.
I agree with you. I mean, as a CEO of a more compact firm, I am similarly tasked, and also I have a global investment banking background, and I know in some ways it's perhaps easier for us in the smaller firms to be more responsive and agile. But I do agree that wherever you are, big or large firm, it needs that commitment from the top down, and to move this ahead and to make things happen. It's something that cascades very well, and the enthusiasm and passion that the leadership shows for this particular discipline is something that imparts into teams very well. I think that is particularly relevant at the moment because seemingly we're at a point in the cycle where we are seeing a retraction, we can't ignore it, of sustainability accented commitments by major firms in both within the financial sector and outside of it. But I think particularly those retractions by international financial sector firms are catching the attention of the press and of course observers as well. I don't know whether you have any view about that.
Well, yeah, obviously there is a certain amount of global politics going on right now, without mentioning any specific names. I think the importance of particularly the bigger firms is to hold firm, in my opinion, on some of these fundamental questions. It's very easy to react to flip-flop around, but I think basically it's important that we kind of hold our ground.
Yeah, so I think we were about due to wrap up. So very briefly, in less than a minute, again, focusing on ASEAN, if you were asked to propose one solid step, talking about top-down commitment, policy, formation, politics, what steps should ASEAN leaders take today in the interest of securing economic stability and sustainable development for the future? I mean, what a question to ask, and ask a response.
That should run for president of some way if I can answer this one.
Let's blame Jeff.
Yeah, no, it's a broad question to say the least. I mean, obviously, within the ASEAN region, an awful lot of institutions will be doing this extremely well right now. So I don't want to teach anybody to suck eggs, but I think the key thing is we've found to increase profitability, which for an institution, it has to happen. So to increase profitability, there's a much more close connection now between customers' views on sustainability, efficiency, and green energy, etc. Their views are now correlating more and more to product design and demand for products. So I think keeping a very close eye on what the customers, particularly at a younger age demographic, are looking for is the key thing, and not assuming we just produce what we always have produced. So I think it's that alignment with the younger generation who really are much more discerning, we found, in terms of what are we doing and how are we doing it. So I think that's the key thing. And profit usually flows in those areas if you get it right.
Interesting comment to finish on. I so wish that we had longer. Charles, I'm going to invite you out for a coffee because there's more that I have to ask you.
I'll hold you to that.
Yeah. But I just want to thank you for joining me today, and also for your really insightful remarks and your responses. Similarly, my thanks and our thanks to GEFI and to the Asian Institute of Chartered Bankers, and to the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, UNEP-FI, for organising and endorsing this ever-evolving event, and for giving us the opportunity to share our observations with you today, and also to impart our thoughts and perspectives. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Stella.
Thank you very much for having me on this wonderful program and this wonderful conference. When it comes to sustainability, I want to just say a few words about NBSB and its approach to sustainability. NBSB is currently celebrating its 75th anniversary. It's a financial institution that's actually older than Malaysia itself. And it's gone through a long process of evolution until finally evolving into a full-fledged Islamic bank. So that being the case, when we think of sustainability in NBSB, we link it to the foundation of the nation, the Malaysian nation, which is belief in God. And therefore, what flows naturally from belief in God is that everything around you is God's creation, and everything therefore around you is a sacred trust from God. The question is, how do you interact with this trust? How do you interact with God's river, God's trees, God's animals, God's people, right? And the word that we use in Malay is adab, which is right conduct. And so for us, when we look at sustainability, we look at it from that angle, that how these sustainable practices all revolve around how do we approximate the proper conduct with God's creation, right? And we can understand the proper conduct through a number of things. Through religion, this is one. Through cultural practices throughout history, that's the second. And also through science, understanding the correlations between certain actions and certain results. For example, global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. As scientists have studied this phenomenon, they found a correlation between greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas concentrations, and climate change. And therefore, it's important to mitigate the harm that may result from this. So this is how we look at, sustainability. Now, there was also a question regarding us combining Sharia and sustainability. I think because we are, as far as I know, the first financial institution to combine these two. And for us, as an Islamic bank, right, Sharia is not just, a few laws and rules that relate to transactions, but it's actually the sum total of all of the guidance that God sends to human beings through his prophets. So therefore, sustainability is effectively a subset of that guidance, right? And for us, we venture to say that if we want true sustainability, we have to link that to the sustainer himself. God is the one who created everything. He is the one who sustains everything from moment to moment. So therefore, we have to acknowledge him and acknowledge that everything is his creation, and in order for us to have true and deeply rooted sustainability. So it's a journey, and it's a journey that we're looking forward to taking, and we're looking forward to sharing our findings and our reflections, throughout this journey. I think another question that was posed related to our sustainability products and how they relate to the market and the response. So many of our sustainability products are under MIDF, and MIDF originally was set up by the government as an institution to support Malaysian industry. So our products, to a large degree, are all aligned to the national strategy. So we have specific financing for SMEs or run by women, which is clearly a government strategy. We have products for mobility, electric mobility infrastructure, so charging stations and things like that, in order to build a network that can support, electric vehicles. We have very good take up in that regard as well. Also, automation, agro food, agro tech, and mechanization and industrialization. So also we have a very strong take up in that regard. All of these are in line with the government direction. We also have programs for low income housing as well, because housing is a very important factor for family stability. We also are supporting the solar energy sector in the capital markets. So alhamdulillah, we are very blessed to support an award-winning solar green sukuk called Green Nicola. We have done 2 issuances of the sukuk supporting the solar energy sector as well. So I think overall we found that, when the products are in line with the government direction, when we're all swimming in the same lane, that there is a strong take up. I think the final question relates to, my role in the principles for responsible banking, and writing some of the sections that related to Islamic banking and how I feel about institutions exiting. I think, you know, when the way we look at sustainability, right, it's not purely a utilitarian approach where, look, unless everybody's doing it, we're not going to do it. No, we feel that it's a moral imperative. We're doing it because we believe it's the right thing to do. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he has this tradition where he said, don't be such a person who has no real personality, where if people do good, they do good, and if people do evil, they do evil, but be someone who is firmly rooted, where if people do good, you do good, and if people do evil, then you don't follow that. So, and we're not judging anyone, but we say that if we believe that doing taking certain sustainable approaches, for us at NBSB, we have committed to net zero, we've committed to carbon neutrality, we've committed to originating 10 billion in sustainable and transition finance, as well as 50,000 volunteer hours. We believe that that's the right thing to do. We believe that this represents our sacred trust, to our communities, to our stakeholders, to our shareholders. So therefore, we're going to do it, regardless of what other people do. you know um and and I do acknowledge that many of the large institutions, they do have commitments to sustainability, but they may have different perspectives. They may um have their own net zero commitment and their own pathways to doing that. And so we don't judge anyone, but we try to work together to for the common good. And I think the beauty of the sustainability movement is we realize that we all have to work together. And we found personally nothing but love amongst the financial institutions. In places where we would otherwise be competing when it comes to the sustainability, we find the doors are open and people are willing to collaborate and give of their time and give of their knowledge and their effort to help others. So I've noticed that with the largest banks. And so I'm optimistic about the future. And I feel very blessed and very honored to be with you today virtually. And I look forward to meeting all of you physically one day.